There is a glass case sitting in a private room somewhere in Monroe, Connecticut. It is locked. It is bolted shut. And on the front of that case, there is a single handwritten warning that reads, "Positively do not open." Inside that case is a doll. Not the wide-eyed porcelain creature you've seen in the movies. Not the cracked, menacing figure staring out from horror posters and film trailers. No. What's inside that case is a soft, floppy, cloth, Raggedy Ann doll. The kind you'd find in any toy store. The kind a grandmother might keep on a shelf. The kind that looks completely, utterly harmless. And that, if you think about it, is exactly what makes it so terrifying. Because, if you know this story, the real story, not the Hollywood version, then you know that what lives inside that doll is not a ghost. It's not the spirit of a sad little girl. It is something far older, far more patient, and far more dangerous than any movie could ever portray. This is the true story of Annabelle. If you're new here, and you're into real crime, paranormal cases, and the stories that blur the line between what we can explain and what we can't, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We do this every week. And I promise you, this one is going to stay with you. Let's get into it. Before we get to the doll, we need to talk about the two people center of this story, because without understanding who Ed and Lorraine Warren were, you can't fully appreciate why what they said about Annabelle carries the weight that it does. Ed Warren was born in 1926 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He grew up in a house he genuinely believed was haunted, and from the time he was a child, that experience drove a relentless obsession with the supernatural. He served in the US Navy during World War II, and when he came back, he threw himself into studying demonology. Not in a classroom. There was no degree for it. He read everything he could find. He consulted with priests. He studied theology and the documented history of demonic activity going back centuries. He eventually became one of the very few lay people ever recognized by the Roman Catholic Church as a legitimate demonologist, a distinction almost never given to someone outside the clergy. Lorraine Warren was born in 1927, also in Connecticut. She and Ed met as teenagers. From the time she was a child, Lorraine claimed she could see auras around people, colors and energies that indicated their emotional and spiritual state. She kept this to herself for years, afraid of what people might think. But when she met Ed, and he told her about the things he had experienced growing up, she finally felt safe enough to open up about what she could perceive. Together, they were something unique. Ed had the theological framework, the demonological knowledge, and the methodical investigative approach. Lorraine had something that couldn't be taught, a sensitivity to spiritual presences that even her critics found difficult to dismiss. In 1952, they founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, the NESPR, one of the oldest paranormal investigation organizations in American history. Over the next 5 decades, Ed and Lorraine would go on to investigate more than 10,000 cases of alleged hauntings, demonic infestations, and possessions across the United States and beyond. Their case files would eventually inspire some of the most successful horror films ever made. The Conjuring, the Amityville Horror, The Haunting in Connecticut, and yes, Annabelle. But long before any of those films existed, long before most people had ever heard their names, Ed and Lorraine Warren received a phone call about a doll. And that call would define the rest of their lives. It was 1970. A young nursing student named Donna was about to turn 28 years old. Her mother, wanting to do something special, went to a local hobby shop looking for a gift. She spotted a Raggedy Ann doll on the shelf. One of those classic American cloth dolls with the red yarn hair, the stitched button eyes, and the soft round face with a simple painted smile. Something about it caught her attention. She felt drawn to it. She bought it and brought it home. Now here's the thing. Donna was 28. She was a working nurse. She shared an apartment with her roommate and fellow nurse, Angie. A Raggedy Ann doll was, by most standards, not a practical birthday gift for a grown woman. But when her mother handed it to her, something about it, maybe nostalgia, maybe the warmth of the gesture, made Donna feel fond of it immediately. She brought it home. She put it on her bed. She thought nothing more of it. And for the first few days, nothing happened. The doll sat where Donna left it. Life went on normally. But then, something small, something easy to explain away. Donna came home from a shift at the hospital one afternoon and noticed that the doll, which she had left sitting upright on her bed, was now lying on its side, facing the door, like it had turned to watch for her return. She told herself she must have bumped it on her way out that morning. Or maybe Angie had moved it. She set it back the way it was and went to bed. But it kept happening. Day after day, she would leave the apartment with the doll in one position and come home to find it somewhere else entirely. Sitting in a chair in the living room when she'd left it on the bed, kneeling on the floor when she'd left it on the sofa. Once, she came home to find it standing, not sitting, not lying down, but upright, balanced on its own feet, in the corner of her bedroom with its face toward the wall. Donna and Angie began tracking it carefully. Before leaving for their shifts, they would both take note of the doll's exact position, agree on it between the two of them, and then come home together to see if anything had changed. And every single time, something had. The doll had moved. Not dramatically, not violently, but precisely, deliberately, as if whatever was moving it wanted them to know that it knew they were watching. Weeks passed. The doll's movements became a kind of grim routine in their apartment, and then something new started. The notes. They started appearing around the apartment, on the coffee table, on the kitchen counter, on the floor near the front door. Small pieces of parchment paper with 2 words written in what looked like a child's handwriting. Help us. And then, not long after, more notes appeared with a slightly different message. Help me. What made this particularly disturbing, beyond the obvious, was the paper itself. Parchment paper. Donna and Angie searched the entire apartment. They did not own parchment paper. They had never purchased it, never brought it home, never kept it in a drawer. They went through every cabinet, every shelf, every room. There was no parchment paper anywhere in that apartment. And yet there it was, with those 2 words, over and over again. They were frightened, but they were also, and this is important, not yet convinced they were dealing with something evil. Strange, yes. Unexplainable, absolutely. But at this point, both women were still trying to find rational explanations. Maybe someone was getting into the apartment. Maybe they had somehow forgotten about parchment paper they'd purchased. Maybe there was an explanation they just hadn't thought of yet. Then Donna came home one evening and found the doll had moved again. This time, it was in the hallway, outside her bedroom, near the bathroom, and on its chest and on the backs of its hands were drops of what appeared to be blood. No one had been in the apartment. No one in the building reported anything unusual. There was no broken glass, no sign of a struggle, no injury to any person or animal. Just the doll and the blood. At this point, Donna did what a lot of people in her situation might do. She reached out to someone who claimed to be able to communicate with the other side, a psychic medium. And the medium's answer would prove to be the most dangerous thing that happened in that entire apartment. The medium agreed to hold a séance in the apartment. Donna, Angie, and a few others were present. The lights went low, the questions were asked, and the medium delivered a message. The doll, she said, was inhabited by the spirit of a young girl. Her name was Annabelle Higgins. She had been 7 years old when she died in a car accident, right on the property where the apartment building now stood, before it had even been built. Annabelle's spirit had never moved on. She was still there, on that land, lonely and lost. And when Donna brought the doll into the apartment, the spirit of little Annabelle had felt something: warmth, safety, familiarity. She had been drawn to Donna and Angie. She just wanted to be close to them. She just wanted somewhere to belong. And then the medium asked the question that changed everything. Would Donna and Angie give the spirit of Annabelle Higgins permission to inhabit the doll, to stay with them? Donna and Angie said yes. They looked at each other across that dimly lit room, and they said yes. What would you have done? A grieving, lonely child, a spirit that just wanted somewhere safe. It seemed, in that moment, in that emotional context, like the compassionate thing to do. But here is what the Warrens would later tell them, with absolute certainty. That yes was an open door, and what walked through it was not a little girl. Angie's boyfriend, Lou, had been skeptical about all of this from the very beginning. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in seances or spirits or haunted dolls. He had told Donna and Angie more than once that he thought the whole thing was nonsense, and that they should get rid of the doll before it caused real problems, whatever that even meant to someone who didn't believe in the supernatural. But Lou had something beyond skepticism. He had an instinct about the doll that he couldn't explain in rational terms. A bad feeling, a sense that something about it was genuinely wrong, in a way he couldn't articulate. He was right. One night, Lou was sleeping on the couch in Donna's apartment while Donna was out. He had fallen asleep normally, and then he woke up in a cold panic. He later described a feeling of being pinned down, unable to move, unable to breathe. He said he opened his eyes and looked up, and the doll, the Raggedy Ann doll, that had been sitting in the chair across the room, was kneeling on his chest. Its tiny cloth hands wrapped around his throat. He couldn't move. He couldn't call out. He lay there, paralyzed, staring up at this soft, smiling doll that was sitting on him. And then everything went dark. He woke up later, alone on the couch. The doll was back across the room, in the chair where it had been. He wasn't sure if it had been a dream. It wasn't sure of anything. Then came the afternoon that removed all doubt. Lou was alone in the apartment. Donna was out. Angie was out. And he heard rustling coming from Donna's bedroom. Distinct, deliberate sounds, like someone moving around in there. He assumed, logically, that someone had broken in. He got up, went to the hallway, and pushed open the bedroom door. The room was empty. No person, no animal, no sign that anyone had been there, except the doll, lying face down on the floor. And then Lou felt it. A searing, burning pain ripped across his chest. He looked down and pulled up his shirt. 7 claw marks, 3 running vertically and 4 running horizontally, had appeared across his chest, deep, raw, and immediately bleeding. Not scratches, wounds, like something had physically raked its claws across his skin. No animal was in that room. No person was in that room. And yet the marks were there, clearly, undeniably, bleeding through his shirt. The marks healed remarkably quickly. Within 48 hours, they were almost completely gone. The Warrens would later identify this as a characteristic sign of demonic activity. Injuries caused by inhuman entities often heal at an unnatural pace, as if the physical evidence is being deliberately erased. Donna knew she was out of her depth. She called for help. Donna reached out to a local Episcopal priest, Father Hagen. She told him everything. The movements, the notes, the blood, the seance, the permission she and Angie had given, and what had happened to Lou. Father Hayden listened carefully. He was sympathetic, but he was also honest with her. This was beyond what he felt qualified to handle on his own. He contacted his superior, Father Cook, and Father Cook made a call that brought Ed and Lorraine Warren to Donna and Angie's apartment door. When the Warrens arrived, they didn't walk in with drama or theatrics. They sat down. They listened. They interviewed Donna, Angie, and Lou separately and together, asking detailed questions, taking notes, documenting everything. Ed was methodical. Lorraine was quiet, observant, moving through the apartment, paying attention to what she could sense in the rooms, the corners, the air around the door. And then Lorraine turned to Donna and asked a question that Donna had not expected. "Did you give it permission to stay with you?" Donna said yes. She explained about the seance, about Annabelle Higgins, about the decision she and Angie had made in that moment. Lorraine closed her eyes briefly, and then looked at Donna with the kind of expression that tells you the news is not going to be good. The entity in that doll, Lorraine explained, was not a child. The spirit of Annabelle Higgins, the lonely 7-year-old who died on the property, was a story, a performance, a lie crafted with precision to earn Donna and Angie's sympathy and, more critically, their permission. Because permission matters. In the Warrens' understanding of how demonic entities operate, an explicit invitation, a spoken yes, gives that entity a level of access it would not otherwise have. It changes the nature of the infestation. The seance hadn't helped an innocent spirit. It had opened a door. Ed Warren was equally direct. He explained the distinction that he had learned over decades of investigation. The spirits of deceased human beings do not inhabit inanimate objects. They attach to people, to places, but not to dolls. Only in human presences, demonic entities, do this. And they don't do it because they want to live inside a doll. They do it because the doll is a stepping stone, a focal point, a tool to generate fear, to gain trust, to break down the psychological defenses of the people around it, until those people are vulnerable enough to be fully possessed. The doll was never the target. Donna and Angie were. The entity had identified its two subjects, both young women, both living alone, both working exhausting hospital shifts that left them physically and emotionally depleted, and it had chosen its approach with cold, calculated intelligence. Start with curiosity, then build to unease, then fear, then grief and sympathy, then violence. They were already at violence. It was time to act. The Warrens arranged for the apartment to be formally exorcised. Father Jason Bradford, a Catholic exorcist, came to perform the rites. The prayers were said. The rituals were performed. The apartment was blessed, room by room. And when it was over, Ed and Lorraine Warren made their decision. They were taking the doll with them. They wrapped Annabelle carefully and placed it in the back of their car. And almost immediately, before they had even left the neighborhood, something changed. The car began drifting, not because of the road, not because of the weather, not because of any mechanical issue that Ed could identify. The vehicle simply began pulling to the side, veering off course as if being pushed from outside or pulled from within. The brakes felt unreliable. Ed fought the steering wheel. Lorraine sat in the passenger seat, watching the doll in the back. She reached into her bag and found a small bottle of holy water. She turned in her seat and sprinkled it directly on the doll, praying aloud as she did. The car steadied. Slowly, the pulling sensation faded. They made it home, but the moment Annabelle entered the Warren house, the activity resumed. The doll appeared in different rooms. It was found on different floors. Ed placed it in a chair in his personal study and discovered it on the other side of the house hours later, seated upright on the living room couch. The room terror. Lorraine reported seeing it levitate above the case that had been prepared for it, hovering briefly before settling back down. Ed contacted Bishop Robert McKenna, a Roman Catholic priest with experience in exorcism and demonic containment. The bishop came to the Warren home, blessed the doll in a formal ceremony, and placed Annabelle in a specially constructed glass and wood display case. The case was moved to the Warrens' Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut, a collection of hundreds of allegedly haunted and cursed objects gathered over 5 decades of investigation. On the front of the case, they placed a single warning: "Positively do not open." A priest came every single week to perform a formal blessing of the case, and for a while, the activity quieted. The Occult Museum became well known over the years, a destination for paranormal researchers, journalists, curious visitors, and skeptics looking to test their nerve. And Annabelle, sitting in her locked case in the center of it all, became its most famous resident. But the doll did not simply sit there quietly and let people stare at her. Father Jason Bradford, the priest. Not long after Annabelle's installation in the museum, Father Jason Bradford, the same exorcist who had performed the rites in Donna's apartment, came to the Warren home for a visit. He and Ed were talking in the museum room when the priest's eyes landed on Annabelle. He walked over, picked up the doll, and held it in front of his face. His expression was something between amusement and dismissal. "You're just a Raggedy Ann doll, Annabelle. You can't hurt anyone." He tossed the doll back into the chair with a casual flick of his wrist. Ed Warren's response was immediate. "That is one thing you better not say." The priest laughed it off. He finished his visit, said his goodbyes, and got in his car to drive home. A few hours later, the phone rang. It was Father Bradford. His brakes had failed as he entered a busy intersection. His car had been struck in the crash that followed. He survived, but barely. His vehicle was completely destroyed. And he told Lorraine Warren that in the moments before the accident, something had drawn his eyes to the rearview mirror. He had seen Annabelle in the back seat. The motorcyclist. This is perhaps the most widely told incident connected to Annabelle, and the one that left the most permanent mark on the Warrens' understanding of what they were dealing with. A young man came to visit the museum with his girlfriend. He was confident, dismissive, the kind of person who had clearly come to prove a point. He stood in front of Annabelle's case, leaned close to the grass, and tapped on it with one knuckle. He smiled at his girlfriend, and then he addressed the doll directly. "If you're so real, come after me. Do something." Ed Warren was in the room. He stepped forward and firmly asked the young man to leave. He wasn't angry. He had seen this before too many times. He knew what happened when people treated that case like a game. He walked the couple to the door himself. They left on a motorcycle. They didn't make it home. The young man lost control of the bike and crashed directly into a tree. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. He was killed instantly. His girlfriend survived, but sustained injuries so severe that she spent over a year in the hospital recovering and lived with permanent disfigurement for the rest of her life. When she was finally well enough to speak with Lorraine Warren, she described what had happened in the moments just before the crash. She and her boyfriend had been laughing, joking about the doll, about how ridiculous the whole thing was. And then she had looked in the rearview mirror. She had seen Annabelle's face, grinning. Her boyfriend had looked too, and then he'd driven them into the tree. The homicide detective. Over the years, multiple law enforcement officers visited the museum, some as believers, some as open-minded professionals, some who treated the whole thing as an interesting curiosity. One of those visitors was a homicide detective who apparently decided that the warnings on Annabelle's case did not apply to him. He reached into the case without permission, intending to inspect the doll more closely. According to the Warrens, he was stabbed. An unseen force drove what felt like a blade into his hand. The wound was real and immediate. He left the museum shaken and bleeding. The experience was, by all accounts, significant enough that the detective eventually retired from law enforcement earlier than planned. The Warrens always maintained that these incidents were not random. They were, in their view, a pattern of deliberate response from the entity, a consistent punishment for mockery, dismissal, and disrespect. The doll was not simply a focal point for a haunting. It was the anchor for something with intelligence, something that perceived contempt and responded to it. At this point in the story, it's worth pausing to talk about something that a lot of you who are fans of the Conjuring universe are probably thinking about. Because if you've seen the 2014 film Annabelle, or its sequels Annabelle Creation and Annabelle Comes Home, you already know that Hollywood made some pretty significant changes to this story. Let's start with the most obvious one, the look of the doll. In the movies, Annabelle is a large, wide-eyed porcelain doll, beautifully crafted, deeply unsettling, with a face designed by a professional proctopar and the pulse of a trail state, a spy from the table from the doll to the wall. In real life, the actual Annabelle doll is a Raggedy Ann, a soft cloth doll with yarn hair and a stitched smile. The kind sold in gift shops and hobby stores across the country. Tony Scarier, the Warrens' son-in-law and the current caretaker of the collection, was once asked about this. He said, "The movies had accurately captured the spirit of the doll's mythology, but that the visual change was a deliberate Hollywood decision." He noted that Lorraine Warren herself once said something that has always stuck with me. "Looks are deceiving." And she was right. In a way, the fact that the real Annabelle looks so innocent makes the story more disturbing, not less. Because the whole point, the entire strategy of the entity, was deception. It chose a friendly, soft, harmless-looking toy. It presented itself as a sad little girl. It earned sympathy. It got permission. The horror was never in the appearance. The horror was in what was hiding behind it. The movie also invents significant plot elements that never appeared in the Warrens' actual case files. The character of Annabelle Higgins in the film is a cult member, an adult woman who dies clutching the doll, summoning a demon that possesses it. In reality, Annabelle Higgins was the fabricated identity of the demonic entity itself, a name it invented to gain access. The seance, the sympathy, the permission, those things happened, but the backstory of a cult? Pure fiction. The films also gave the demon a name, Malthus, which appears nowhere in the NESPR documentation. The Warrens never named the specific entity they believed was attached to the doll. Does any of this mean the movies aren't worth watching? Of course not. They're terrifying for exactly the reasons good horror movies are terrifying. But they are fiction built on a real foundation. And the real foundation, if anything, is more unsettling than anything that made it onto screen. Ed Warren passed away on August 23, 2006. Lorraine Warren, who continued their work for 13 more years after her husband's death, passed away on April 18, 2019. With their passing, the care of the Occult Museum's collection fell to their daughter Judy and her husband Tony Scarier, who continues to oversee the NSPR and maintain the artifacts. The museum itself, which had been housed in the Warrens' Monroe, Connecticut property, was eventually closed to the public due to zoning regulations. The property was simply not set up for the kind of commercial museum traffic it had been drawing for years, and local authorities eventually required it to cease public operations. But Annabelle didn't disappear. In May of 2025, the NESPR sponsored a traveling exhibition called the Devils on the Run Tour, a public event that brought some of the Warrens' most well-known artifacts out of storage for display at locations across the United States. Annabelle was part of the tour, and during a stop in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, on July 13th, 2025, a paranormal investigator named Dan Rivera died suddenly while handling the Annabelle doll. The Adams County Coroner's Office determined that Rivera had suffered a heart attack. It was noted that he had a pre-existing history of cardiac problems, and no foul play was suspected. By every clinical and legal measure, it was a natural death. But Rivera was handling Annabelle when it happened. The paranormal community, believers and skeptics alike, could not stop talking about the timing. Coincidence, said some. Corroboration, said others. The same conversation that has surrounded this doll for over 50 years. Annabelle remains in Tony Sparrow's care. She is not on public display. She is not accessible. The case is locked. The blessings continue, and the warning sign remains. Positively do not open. Let me be honest with you for a moment, because I think this story deserves that. There are legitimate skeptics who argue that everything connected to the Annabelle doll can be explained. That Donna and Angie were young women living alone, working exhausting jobs, under stress, and prone to misremembering or misinterpreting normal events. That Lou's claw marks could have been self-inflicted, consciously or otherwise. That the priest's car accident, the motorcyclist's death, the detective's injury, none of these were ever independently verified. The Warrens reported them. The Warrens always reported them. And the Warrens, it's worth acknowledging, had both a professional and a financial interest in maintaining the mythology around their cases. These are fair points. They deserve to be heard. But here's what I keep coming back to. 7 distinct claw marks, 3 vertical, 4 horizontal, on a man's chest in an empty room. Notes appearing on parchment paper that no one in the apartment owned. A soft cloth doll that 2 intelligent, educated women repeatedly observed in different positions than the ones they had carefully noted before leaving their home. And then the accidents. The timing. The consistency of the pattern. Priest laughs at the doll. Priest crashes his car. Young man mocks the doll. Young man dies on his motorcycle. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe the Warrens fabricated or embellished everything. Maybe there is a rational explanation for every single incident in this story. Or maybe, and I say this not as a believer or a skeptic, but as someone who thinks these things deserve genuine consideration, maybe the universe contains things that our current frameworks aren't equipped to measure. Lorraine Warren spent her entire adult life looking at that doll. She knew exactly what it was. She never changed her account, never softened her position, never backed down from the claim that what was inside that case was real and dangerous. She maintained that until the day she died. Whether or not you believe her, that level of conviction, sustained over 50 years, is worth something. At minimum, it's worth taking the story seriously. Every culture, in every corner of the world, has some version of this story. The object that shouldn't have been brought home, the gift that carried something extra with it, the moment of kindness that opened a door to something unkind. The Annabelle case is remarkable, not because of the movies, and not even because of the claw marks, or the car accidents, or the death by motorcycle. It's remarkable because of how it started. A mother, a hobby shop, a birthday. A soft, smiling cloth doll that looked like nothing at all. And 2 young women who felt sorry for what they thought was a lonely little girl. That sympathy, That moment of open-hearted, well-intentioned compassion was the crack in the door. And what slid through it spent years making its presence known in ways that neither Donna nor Angie, nor anyone who came after them, could ever fully explain away. The case is locked. The blessings continue. And somewhere in Monroe, Connecticut, in a room that is no longer open to the public, Annabelle sits in her glass case, soft, floppy, smiling, exactly as she has for over 50 years, waiting for someone to say yes again. That's the story. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for watching. If this got under your skin even a little bit, please hit the like button. It helps more people find this channel. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you're the first to know when the next story drops. Stay curious, stay careful, and whatever you do, don't open the case.